So, a couple of things that are really important that I see for men anyway, in order to live an integrated life. I see this term around a lot around, becoming integrated, and the definition of it gets pretty loose, and most of the time it's because of the polarity style movement saying we need to integrate our feminine before we can be a whole masculine. And I don't believe that. I just don't believe it. I think that's a made up construct in order to keep men moving towards this idea that they need to be more feminine. And what I believe around integration is being more of the nature of integrating the parts of you that you're not okay with and fully owning it. That's where you really become integrated. You don't become integrated by trying to be something that you're not. Now, you can adopt feminine attributes if you're a man, but if we look at this, the nature of society, what the nature of feminist programming wants is men to be vulnerable, men to be more emotion led, more driven by their emotions, feeling so deeply. This is not what we're supposed to be. There's nothing wrong with having emotions, it's natural. There's nothing wrong with feeling emotions, that's normal. Being ruled by emotions, that's where we start to come unstuck. And the more you start to exercise that muscle, the more unstable you're going to become. So, what we want to have is a sense of capacity. This is where Stoicism gets a bad rap, right? Because people think that Stoicism means to not feel anything, and that's not true. What it is to handle large emotions, have the capacity to have large emotions while remaining unmoved or unaffected by it. Okay. And this is a really important thing to master, especially as a man. There's going to be times where your emotions will overrule you. Now, if you look back in your history, what you're going to find is that every bad decision that you've ever made will be one where it's been ruled by too many emotions. Your emotional state has been overwhelming, and you've acted on it thinking that in the moment that that was real, and it's been inaccurate. Go back through your history and have a look at it. You may have made business decisions that haven't worked out for you, but if you're doing that from an analytical, logical, calm, sober place, you can sit there and go, okay, cool, that didn't work out. How do I fix that? It'll be fairly easily addressed. You won't necessarily regret it. You can say, well, I did my best and this is where I'm operating from, and that's okay. My history is littered with that. I've had failures, many of them. The way I see failure is learning how to do something successfully. That's it. It's just a simple reframe around it. But I look back at the mistakes that I've made, then I start to analyze that and I go, wow, they were all driven when I was in a state of high emotion. So even though women want us to be more emotional, what I feel is the most important thing for men is to be in control of your emotions. Don't let it spill out. There's that saying, if you don't heal what hurt you, you'll bleed on everyone that didn't cut you. Something like that, which is a really good it's a really good quote. And so what we have to do is firstly you want to look to brotherhood to start to resolve that. Men need to first and foremost be okay being alone. This isn't being a lone wolf. It's okay being alone. There's loneliness and then there's being alone. Alone is the physical, lonely is the emotional. We have to be okay being on our own as well as the loneliness that we have to face. Every human gets lonely. I've experienced it before. I can now spend large amounts of time alone. I don't really get lonely. It's not to say that I might never again. I might, but it doesn't really happen. I used to, however, I used to feel lonely, and then I would seek distraction from that. So the first thing is especially if you're coming out of like more of the anxious attachment or needy style of man, right? Or transitioning from boy to man psychology. That's really the integration that needs to happen. The boy to man psychology, that's the first thing. Then what happens is the integration of the parts that you think others won't accept. That's what integration is, when you're comfortable with that. And that's what's really important. So for me, my anger and aggression was something that was I could call it my red flag, right? That was it. Also, like partying, hedonism, all that sort of stuff. For a long time, I was just pleasure driven. And it was all about escapism. because I was using pleasure to avoid the pain, right? And even though I've been on the path for a long time, when you're brought up in a society that celebrates hedonism, pleasure driven activities, and things like that, and escapism, and it's celebrated, you just become a product of your environment. It was unconscious. So I don't mind admitting that because I've integrated that and I'm not ashamed of it. And so the things that we're ashamed of and we're hiding, those are the things that we need to integrate, and we integrate them by owning it. We simply own it, because men deal with a lot of shame around what they're going through. But if you own it, your shame becomes a point of humility. Humility is the answer to shame. Humility, then you start to develop humor out of it. Whereas if you're not owning it, the shame that's driving you will expose your humiliation. Really important thing to understand. And so when I come back to the term integrated, everyone's talking about getting into your heart, getting into your heart, getting into your heart. And that's, you don't want to make decisions from your heart most of the time. Then that means you're emotion led or trusting your gut. Your gut is where your vagus nerve sits, and that's going to send fear signals out. And this is where fear and excitement hit in that area. This is why the same place you get butterflies for a woman that you meet, or a man that you meet, if a woman's watching this, is the same place that you're going to need to go to the bathroom if you've got IBS. Like, sit with that and think about that. It's not a good place to make a decision from, a gut feel. There's a difference between intuition and there's a difference between gut feel, right? Gut feel can sometimes be accurate. Intuition is largely mistaken for what is the ego using a protection mechanism. Okay. So we have to go get the mind right, then we have to get the heart right, and then we have to get the lower aspects right, which is the survival mechanism, right? And the survival mechanism is get your balls right, reclaim them. Second is get your heart right. Like, what are you doing good for the world? Are you in service? But not service from like a false prophet kind of space. Service in like, what does the world need and what do I want to do, and marry those up. And then get the mind right. The mind right is your intellect. The old Stoics spoke about you have to be strong in body and strong in mind. Strong in mind often has a weak body. A strong body often has a weak mind. Now, it takes a lot to develop a strong body, but what it is if you're compensating for something, then you're going to be avoiding something. And we don't want to avoid something because then we're unintegrated. You have to have all of them. The physical, right? Physical is really dependent on what works for you. If you want to build muscle, that's great. It takes a long time to do that. And an impressive physique is an impressive attribute to have. I'm more of the martial artist. I prefer martial arts. I'd prefer to have a skill to know how to defend myself rather than just think that I'll be able to if shit goes down. Men are 4,000, I think it's 4,000 times more, like their belief in themselves, if something goes down, is 4,000 times more than what is actual reality. Like I spoke to a woman once and she said, I'd die for my little cousin. I'd jump in front of a bus for him, etc. And I was like, that's unlikely. And she's like, no, I wouldn't. I die. It's also fucking romantic, right? Most people won't. They'll freeze, right? Their autonomic nervous system will override their logical processing or their illogical processing, and self-preservation is going to kick in. And there's a biological imperative that will make someone freeze, shut down, or run away. Most people aren't going to jump in front of a bus for someone, despite the romantic notion of it. It's usually not going to happen. So there's that aspect to it as well. And so if there's physical, right, you need to know how to handle yourself and be strong. If you've got a strong, muscular, big physique, you're going to appear more threatening to people, but back that up and know how to do something with it, use it. Then we have to get, not then, but financial is another thing. As a man, you should want to be able to provide. Absolutely. How any man wouldn't want to be able to be a provider is beyond me. I can't speak to you about it because it's not a language I understand. Then you have to get your intellectual mental pursuits on check. Knowledge and gnosis. And this is really important because the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And the person that becomes a lover of books gets to enter new worlds all the time. And I'm a huge fan of reading and learning. Then you have to have a spiritual faith, which I'm a big fan of. And then what you have to do is bring them all together to integrate those. And we do that by learning to spend time alone and sitting in these. And it's not about when you're wanting to step out into manhood, it's not about trying to become something, it's removing things that are in the way of that. So if you've got loser mates that are dragging you down a bad path by drinking and drugs, get rid of them. If you've got mates that want to sleep around and treat women like shit, get rid of them. If you've got mates around you that just they don't want the best for you, get rid of them. It's pretty simple. Removal is the precursor to filling it up with something good. And so if you look at the nature of physics, nothing exists in a vacuum. There's no such thing as empty space. Everything gets filled. So as you remove the crabs in the bucket that want to pull you back in, what will happen is new men will start to come in. Be discerning. Discerning is an attribute of strategy, and strategy is the way of the warrior, right? And not this heart-led warrior bullshit that's out there that we keep hearing. Like, read the Book of Five Rings by Miyoto Musashi. Read The Art of War by Sun Tzu. These are strategies that you can use in real life to win, to compete, to get advantage, and to use your aggression to build something that's going to help the world. This is what a man does. This is what a man does. So use strategy, read those books. They're two books that I give to men when they're wanting to learn about strategy and how to think properly. They're excellent books because they cover all angles. Also, read something of a spiritual faith. I'm not going to tell you which way to go with that. You know, whether you're reading the Quran or the Bible, it doesn't really matter. But those are important books to read and to understand. And that's what I take. That's a little bit of a take on integration for you guys. And start with one and then build. And that's how you want to do it.